Welcome. Thank you so much for attending this important gathering on the eve of the anniversary of Earth Day. I'm Jessica Munger, one of the co-directors of Move to Amend. Thank you so much for being here. By literally any measurement, the physical health of the planet we call home is in much worse condition than it was on the first Earth Day 52 years ago in 1970. There are many factors for this, but I think the central one is the Western world's worldview that the physical world, the land, water, air, and all of Earth's life forms are inferior to that of human beings and available to be used solely to further human progress. Maybe the most destructive creation that has facilitated us to commodify nature and deeply harm the land, air, and water is the business corporation, without which capitalism would not be nearly as effective in maximizing extraction, production, and profits. Move to Amend has always included the impact of corporate rule on the environment in our education, advocacy, and organizing. Many of our corporate rule stories on the website that you may have seen, or barnstorming tour talks across the country for over a decade, have highlighted the harm that corporate constitutional rights and money as speech have caused to the planet. And there are many, in fact, an ever increasing number of groups from the local to the global levels addressing a wide range of ecological assaults and proposing important alternatives. And this is encouraging. We need to learn from and give support to the ecological justice movement, and particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led groups. We have much to learn. We'd like to think, however, that we have something to share, namely how corporate constitutional rights like to, in all their forms, prevent people and communities from protecting the planet, offering alternatives to ensure a livable world, and changing the current cultural narrative that human beings are separate from nature and are preordained to look at the planet as simply a massive resource to plunder. Yet we understand that we don't simply have an ExxonMobil problem or a JP Morgan Chase problem. It's not just a corporate polluter or funder problem. We don't just have an EPA, NRC, or any other regulatory agency problem, or a Bureau of Land Management problem, or even just an anti-environmental elected officials problem. We have ultimately and profoundly a democracy problem. The lack of individuals and communities who are affected by decisions having a central role in the shaping, implementing, and evaluating of those decisions. Thus, we feel the need to match the scale of solutions to the scale of the existential ecological crisis and democracy crisis. So we're here with you tonight, Move to Amend grassroots volunteer base, a force that well understands our side of the problem and has some really bold ideas for solutions. We have a lot of learning to do though. And as we look around this space, we have to acknowledge that it's incomplete and an imperfect one, that it's part of what we're going to address in budding this group that's forming out of the energy tonight. This is just the first gathering, and we're going to go from here and for this work. We'll talk more about that, and let's get to the exciting part. I'm honored to welcome Ricky Ott to speak with us tonight. Dr. Ricky Ott is a marine toxicologist and former Alaska commercial fisherman who found her path and voice during the transformative crucible on the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Accomplished in civic activism and grassroots engagement, she inspires youth and adults with accessible science and civic-based trainings and with stories to engage people in working together towards a healthy democracy and a healthy energy future. Dr. Ricky Ott currently directs 2 projects for the Earth Island Institute, the Alert Project and Ultimate Civics. Ricky is also one of the original founders of Move to Amend. So thank you so much, Ricky. Really appreciate you being here. Go ahead. And go ahead.
All right. Thank you for organizing this. And I'm actually going to share some stories based on my experiences to illustrate the intersectionality and necessity of the work at hand. Anyway, as our global civilization collapses, it is critical for those who imagine a just, sustainable, fair future to come together with the threads of our own individual stories and our work, to weave those threads together to the next center, to become the next center that's going to sustain us. I mean, our civil society is literally fraying and shredding right now, and we've lost the center. So the where do we find the people to work together? How do we come together? So I'm going to share some stories of place and people, and also honor that 12 years ago now and counting, the BP well blew in the Gulf of Mexico, and 11 workers instantly died in that disaster. I went down spontaneously with a one-way ticket to coach people about how to deal with this disaster based on lessons I'd learned from the Exxon Valdez. I meant to stay a month. I ended up staying a year. And a good part of the next 6 years, trying to mitigate a possible human health tragedy from this disaster. So I'm going to pause the story about human health because that wasn't actually the focus behind the scenes at the time. The focus was the economic health. Surprise, surprise. And that was the industry and government primary concern. The industry insiders, and I literally was on the grounds down there for a year. The industry insiders were predicting that BP America was going to go down, likely taken over by Shell or Exxon. But by June, in just over a month, the inside story had already shifted to rumors of a $20 billion agreement predicated that BP America would stay in business to fulfill and pay that $20 billion. Now, the fear was that if BP America went down, then BP itself would go down. And that got England a little upset. And there were some calls to the White House because England felt that it could go down if BP went down. And then the world economy being what it is, that could go down too, just like dominoes. And this was actually the talk going on. And some of this is in one of the books that validated by a Chelsea Green author that fall for me in October when his book came out, Disaster on the Horizon. So the real problem here is if we don't face our fears, what will happen if the global economy goes down? Those fears actually grow bigger, and the next time around, they're even worse to confront. And witness now what's going on in Russia's war on the Ukraine with the International Monetary Fund saying, if the world doesn't stop with the economic sanctions, the world economy might collapse. So we are all being held hostage now by this suicidal pursuit of maximizing profit at all costs. Collapse is inevitable. The capitalistic model is not sustainable. We know that, okay? I don't want to preach to the choir. We need to face the fear. So the work we weave is about creating a socially responsible and economic model. One of the things I found in my work is that something that constrains a lot of people and holds them in fear, of what's next. I'm going to stick with what we have because we don't know what's next, is that it's a lack of imagination. So in terms of thinking about the next economic model, that's already being done. And there's a really great example with Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, which recognizes the ecological limitations and the social justice needs. So it's like, it's really more than triple bottom line accounting, all right? It puts people in the environment up front, makes this little donut, says if we go into the center of this donut, we're in social collapse. And if we overshoot, we're in ecological overshoot. The ideal economy is in the middle. And it's a bunch of renegade economic students that started this. And I've already tried modeling it and working with fifth graders on this, and they get this new model. It makes more sense than keep using it all, keep spending it all, keep growing, and then what? So that's one great example as that a thread that we can pull forward. Now I'm going to unpause the human health tragedy because that was really what I was working for a lot of my time in the Gulf. And I returned to the Gulf Coast communities, like I said, over the next 7 years, mostly to help people connect the dots between their oil spill exposure and their declining health. With this growing awareness, people started asking about daily exposures to these same oil chemicals, the chemicals that were wafting over the fence lines from refineries and oil and gas activities that were literally in their communities' backyards. So this 6 years, led to a collaboration with people in these fence line communities, literally from Houston, Texas, to Tallahassee, Florida. And the goal was to develop an accessible science-based program that community leaders could use to help residents understand the connection between these oil chemical exposures, even low-level ones, and their human health impacts. This became a toxic trespass training that builds the capacity of the environmental justice people working in these frontline communities to sustain the long-term work of reducing toxic exposures in our homes, our workplaces, our schools, our communities. And this is one of the things that was holding the people back, was this lack of science, this lack of understanding. It just takes people collaborating to bridge this gulf here. So along with the toxic trespass training, there's also a health advocacy guide that shows people how to work with their healthcare providers if they believe they've been chemically poisoned. These manuals are free and they're online on the alertproject.org website under toolkits. So one of the outcomes of this work was that one of the co-authors of the Toxic Trespass Training Manual, Yvette Ariano, has since founded Fence Line Watch to eradicate this toxic multi-generational harm in marginalized communities and deprived neighborhoods. So the sort of the take home from this part of it is that the work that we weave is about the power of collaboration and uplifting each other's work. I mean, come on, face it, we're up against multi-billion-dollar, multi-million-dollar corporations. In the terms of uplifting other people's work and collaboration, I was invited to present the toxic trespass training at the NAACP State Convention in Alabama. And the consensus then was that this information that was developed in these Gulf communities was needed to be a national program in all of its chapters. That work was delayed because of the needs that the previous president brought. And that promise is still there, though. So going back again 12 years to the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, since then, uncounted hundreds, thousands actually, of people have died from oil spill exposures, and thousands more are in court currently seeking economic redress for persistent respiratory diseases, blood cancers, and more from their oil spill exposures. Cases are governed by something called the multi-district litigation. The rules for that are crafted by BP lawyers and other lawyers the rules are narrowly focused on exposure levels and causation. So what is happening now is that claims are being dismissed. Obvious illnesses are being dismissed in court because of clouds of technicalities of being able to offer proof. The scientists no one took exposure levels by individual people. This is an impossible bar. And one frustrated litigant told me, all I want is a fair trial. That's a basic civil right, isn't it? So I'm going to share some links in the chat about some videos and stuff you can watch about some of this. But the point is that the work that we are trying to weave now, that we are weaving, is about another thread is restorative justice that heals wounds instead of this litigious process that we have now that literally pits individuals against these giant corporations, and it further divides communities against themselves. So the work that we are weaving is also about establishing that only human beings have constitutional rights and that corporate polluters have no such rights and cannot claim such rights, cannot claim rights like that health protective regulations are takings of future profits. They can claim no such rights, really, to counter any of the people's constitutional rights in courts. That is some of the work we are weaving. So another sort of thing that happened because of the BP disaster was that after my first month, only my first month in the Gulf Coast communities, I was actually headed back to Alaska, and I had to reroute and go back down to the Gulf because people were literally getting medevaced off boats for acute respiratory failure. But in the process of that turnaround, I was invited by to a First Nations summit in Kitimat, British Columbia. This was a summit of First Nations with unceded territory within the proposed corridor of Enbridge's Northern Gateway Pipeline project. And I guess in sharing some of this next story set is about working with First Nations, who I believe is a really critical voice to be having in our forum, as part of our forum, the greater forum. So here I am in Kitimat, British Columbia, and during this summit, the tribes that were there birthed a new solidarity clan to work together to do everything in their power to block this pipeline project. As a member of this clan, I am now recognized as a matriarch of high standing in all the tribes that are part of this clan. And there's over 100. In 2012, one of the tribes, the United Haida Nation, invited me to testify about the long-term impacts of the Exxon Valdez oil spill to people, communities, environment as their lay expert at a field hearing of the National Energy Board regarding the Enbridge pipeline. Beforehand, the Enbridge lawyer banned every single one of my slides as too emotional. I was supposed to be a scientist. Scientists aren't supposed to be emotional. So I was left to improvise. And in doing that, I created and walked an imaginary timeline, telling stories year by year. By shifting my position away from this designated table over here, it was revealed that the Enbridge lawyer was actually positioned in the audience to sort of unobtrusively hand signal the NEB panel when to cut off speakers. So the lawyer, the corporate lawyer, is actually controlling and signaling the National Energy Board of Canada. The hand signals during my time walk became quite frantic, but they failed to get the National Energy Board's attention because I was over here as opposed to be here. The high chiefs and the matriarchs enjoyed the show, which was all caught on film, and shipped ahead to forewarn the next village of the charade. Enbridge was undeterred and devised another way to undercut the Haida Nation's unified position against the pipeline. In 2016, 2 hereditary chiefs of the Raven clan were exposed to be secretly working and supporting Enbridge and even taking some money on the side. The matriarchs of the Raven clan hosted a potlatch so the community and invited guests of other First Nations could bear witness to this ceremony that would strip the chiefs of their title. This hadn't been done in over 200 years. Chiefs came from all the way from the East Coast, from other Canadian First Nation tribes. I was invited to speak at this potlatch and to bear witness, so I can carry this story. The point of these stories is that when there is something that threatens all of our work, we need to react in the manner of the Haida and the Haisla and the Solidarity Committee clan that was newly created to deal with this perceived threat. So we have this threat of corporate personhood and this money is speech, this free market economic model. And that is now threatening all of our work. I mean, Al Gore is the one that said, we can't solve the climate crisis until we solve the democracy crisis. And then Gore went and built a teach-in, basically, in a process to teach people about specifically focusing on the science and the climate crisis and nothing to do with the democracy crisis. So the time has come. It came together in 2010, actually, when Move to Amend was created. But it's after working so hard over this past 10 years, there's much more awareness of the whole corporate personhood model and what that is doing to all of us and how it is degrading and dehumanizing people, diminishing our rights, building up corporate rights to the point where our democracy is really no longer under the control of the people. There comes a time when it's absolutely critical to bring people together, like what happened in British Columbia, and say all of our individual work matters, but all of our individual work now needs to include this extra work of focusing on how we're going to, in this case, abolish corporate personhood and end money is speech. Those are wrong-headed ideas. And then not only how are we going to do it, but how are we going to carry it forward? So the corporations are also really good at dividing us because they know that the power of the people acting in solidarity actually threatens their survival. They know this, okay? So we need to recognize actually that it's helpful that they are scared of us as well. So I think I'm going to end with my little part I've been working on all these years on the, hang on, it just started raining here. I'm going to get this to make sure you all can hear me. So this ultimate, I have been, when I participated in the 2011, I realized that this was an opportunity to where people were spontaneously coming together because they wanted to do something. But at the same time, I was horrified and I went from Louisiana, New Orleans, up the East Coast, across Chicago, and I was coming down the West Coast when the National Guard was called in to deal with us all. Anyway, the point is that I was heartened by this coming together, but at the same time, I was horrified that people really didn't know how to do democracy. We had lost the skill set of the basic operating instructions of our country. It's like, I mean, to me, it was like Oz, where don't look behind the curtain to see who's really pulling the levers of power. Just shop and vote. Everything will be fine, right? No. And I realized that by Reagan taking out the civics, basic civics, out of elementary and middle schools, high schools, we had actually were a couple generations out of people actually knowing how to do the work of democracy. And that is this work. And I decided to work with students and try to get this back into the schools, and promptly encountered, of course, the corporate boogies that don't want this story to get into the national school system. So nonetheless, where it's led me is that the kids get it. And that's what's really heartening. If you can explain the ideal democracy, this burns like embers in our hearts still. And it just takes a little bit of fanning to make that fire flame again. And the kids can see that where we are now here is not where we need to be. There's this gap, okay? So what is the work of filling that gap? How do we do this? And this is now, I think this movement has reached a time where it does need to come together. We need the organizations in here to, like the NAACP, like the big guns here, not joining us literally, but joining together in a safe space. That Solidarity Clan was about creating a safe space, a forum where people could come together to work on this focus. And I think that now is the next chapter of this work, is this figuring out how we work in a racially charged, very divisive climate to come together. And the way to do that is to bring people from all those different walks of life together and actually start, like we did in Cordova, Alaska, after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. What do you like about our democracy? What do you want to change? How are we going to do it? Let's prioritize. And lo and behold, in working together, you find that it's actually, you have more in common than not. And that actually is, I think, what we're trying to do here. We're trying to set the table to get to that next step of how we work together. So I hope that you've been maybe thinking about your own work and thinking about the greater picture. And I'm going to turn it back to, I think, Jessica.
Yeah.
Okay. To take us to the first round of question follow-up.
Thank you so much, Ricky. Really, really appreciate you articulating all of that. All right, so I'm sure there's some questions or comments for Ricky. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You can feel free to add your question in the chat on the right-hand side there, or you can raise your hand, which should be down at the bottom of your screen. There's a reactions button, and you should be able to raise a hand there. Or you can add the word stack, like a stack of papers, in the chat, and I'll call on you to ask your question aloud. So I'll give you a minute here to get your thoughts together. All right, let's see. Eli, looks like you've got a question. Go ahead.
So I feel like everything that you said is exactly what I've been thinking for a long time. And I've been trying to say that the last part about getting people together. And that's why I joined Move to Amend. And I feel like Move to Amend is the most promising movement that is doing this. Before I joined Move to Amend, I joined a couple other movements and they weren't doing enough. And I joined Represent Us and Common Cause, and I didn't feel like they were doing enough. And so I have 1,000 questions for you. But I think I'm going to try to condense them now. So, like, first of all, I'm so passionate about what you said, because it's like I was just trying to say this to people all day today. Before this meeting, Jenny Spanos, who's here in this meeting, she's the one who told me, hey, you got to talk to, we should talk to college students. So I went to Columbia to talk to college students, and I just felt like a lot of people are not interested. And it's frustrating to me because I could see that everybody's aware of the corruption in our society, but everybody, as much as they're aware or educated about it, either they feel hopeless by it, or they just feel like, well, I got too much going on in my life that I don't want to commit to anything. I have my school, I have my mom, my girlfriend, and my parties, whatever they're doing, that they don't want to take time away to do something that matters, because they're all in escape mode. Everybody's just escaping all the time, escaping into their phones, escaping into weed, escaping into video games, escaping into anything that they can escape into. And it's so frustrating that we all see the same problem and we all are interested and affected by the climate change, but people don't want to come together. And so I want to ask you, number one, how can we effectively work together to motivate people together to think about this every single day of a plan that we have to exactly push this message out that people like I'm constantly thinking about it. How can I motivate more people to unite? And then second of all, well, I have another question after that, but that's the more important one is what do you think I could do? What do you think I could do tomorrow?
Okay, ready? Okay. Thank you. And I want to just give you a shout out and a pat on the back for trying, okay? Because going to college and talking to college is exactly where I started too. And you know what? I realized this is not the right place to start. Why are our kids turning 18 and only knowing about voting one day every other year or every 4 years? That's not democracy. So I took it younger, much more productive, taking it younger. Now, how unite? Okay, how to unite? I think we need to put our heads together about who is doing what. That's why I was bringing these threads into this. We're going to need people who are dealing with the economy. We're going to need people who are dealing with bioregionalism. I didn't even get to that. I got distracted by this drumming and the rain here on the tent. I mean, we need to, so bioregionalism is another big thread that I see, and it has to do with New Zealand is a perfect model where they literally, in the government in this case, decided to divvy up the political boundaries by watershed, literally by watershed. And they spent 4 years in educating people about why this was important. And then overnight, boom, watershed political boundaries. And that forced everybody within that region to deal with their most basic needs together. You can't pollute it so that the bottom of the river, the people can't drink the water. So I know the NAACP is working on climate justice. We need to find the organizations. I mean, we should, well, this is a we thing, not just a me spouting out names, but the gist of it is we put paper to pencil and we start thinking, who are the what are the main threads to building something new? It's got to be about.
Okay, I have an idea.
Yep.
So I was thinking about this earlier anyway, but I was thinking that maybe someone more intelligent than myself, someone more educated than me, maybe you, because you're so very educated about this, that you could make that you can, to all the political action and climate action communities and clubs and basically all the main universities and colleges, and then prep a representative to meet with any one of these political action committees, or because one of them is going to respond, and so we can start with universities, but also the NAACP, the Black Lives Matter, the Common Cause, the other movements, and that we could send them an email basically explaining how and why we have to meet, and how and why your matter is extremely urgent. And then we'll send a representative to meet them, and we'll prep the representative. I could go to the places in New York, and somebody else can go to the places in DC, whatever, and we'll go to each school. And then the goal will be to recruit the students, because I feel like,
Okay,
I can't talk to students when they're in their past.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple things here, because this is the right track. I think what I've been doing, what Move to Amend has been doing, Ultimate Civics, with my Ultimate Civics hat on, with my Alert Project hat on, I've been going out and giving rallying cries in calls in communities to educate people, to give people the skill set and the tools. I think there needs to be some shift now, which is what I think is trying to be birthed here, to where we, instead of going to the community, well, not maybe instead of, but in addition to going to the communities, we are also going to the other groups, going to the NAACPs, going to these big groups, because you don't recruit people by saying, hey, we're having a meeting, come join our meeting. You say, you get on the agenda of their meeting, okay? And that is where I was headed before the last president got into office. So, and regarding schools, I'm that is I think that is a critical thing to work on, because it's too late by the time they get to be 18. They need, I mean, come on, in a monarchy, you don't teach the young monarch, you know, the child who's going to be the future king or whatever, or queen. You don't start teaching them at 18. You start teaching them early on. This is what a monarchy feels like. You are a leader. We need to be empowering and giving our children, helping them discover their agency much earlier than we are now. And the good news is they are, okay? So like everything's coming together right now. And in terms of going to schools, the approach, again, I'm flipping it around. And I'm working with the Cloud Institute for Sustainability Education to develop and work in some school districts. And once you get the school districts to pilot new things, it spreads to other districts. So, so that's all like nuts and bolts stuff. But this also takes time to develop these relationships. And I think that work has been ongoing. And I think we just need to work a lot of those relationships now and say, now is the time. Now is the time.
The thing is that.
Now, wait, I think, just let me see if there's, because I want to get to your second question about this. What can I do? Because I will say that in my 17 years of being on the road, literally it was 17 years. I didn't go home very much. What I learned was that people, and that's what gives me hope, actually. People coming and saying, what can I do? What can I do? It doesn't matter if you're a fifth grader or if you're a seasoned activist who, like, before, you know, that was part of the nuclear protests of the 50s and 60s and the civil rights movement. What can I do now? There are still people. That is like the number one question I get asked. So I think it's going to be critical to recruit the what can I do's into recruiting the locals to get us to these, to spread the word, like the communication committees back in the revolutionary days, you know, or whatever. We need to I mean, we've got the technology, but what we don't have is quite the organization for it yet. The forum, the safe space. And that, one of the things that Native teachers and mentors ingrained in me during my time in Alaska was that when I was trying to work to bring a divisive communities together, and was that focus on the process. If things are done in the right way, the outcome will be greater than what you anticipate. You have to do things in the right way. And the right way is exactly what we're talking about here. Finding out how to engage and bring in the key thinkers. Because ultimately what we're really talking about here is probably, you know, a complete rewrite of the Constitution. Where I'm headed with is, in the school project, is a rewrite of the state constitutions, because most of them, in fact, all of them, do not reflect all the values that we have since realized we need to form a real democracy here. It's not working like we thought at the state level. So how can we expect it to work at the federal level? So I think there's plenty to do. I think we just need to sit down and figure it out. And I don't want to, if there's somebody else, Jessica, that on the stack, yeah,
Sure.
maybe we should just keep going, Eli, and we'll come back. I know it's hard.
Yeah, a million questions, right? Thank you so much. Let's see, we got Mike, and then we'll go to Greg. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, Mike. Hi, Mike Potter's in Pensacola. I'm thinking at the same time as we have to get the world to think large and perceive our common threats, we have to think small too. We have
Yes.
to think small, and every opportunity to have a conversation that asks questions to get them thinking about the things that they aren't seeing on TV, and to think about something that to tell stories. I'm thinking about the fact that the old Jack Tales and Uncle Remus folklore, when it was told by a wise elder, these were lessons that taught people to be clever and don't be fooled when people are trying to play you. We have to take advantage of every small opportunity to do that kind of education, because the civics education isn't there anymore on a grand scale. We have to do it one by one. And at the same time, the common threats that we're going to be ready to perceive as the enemy that we all have to pull together to defeat. That's where our children are starting to come in, and they're perceiving the threats because they know that their generation is going to experience a later and much more deadly stage of some of these things. Just think small and think large at the same time. Don't miss any opportunities to influence people who you don't think you can really have much influence on. They may not show you, but if you ask questions to get them thinking, then some of them have faith. They're going to be quietly thinking, and they're not going to show you had any influence on them.
This is perfect, because when I was on the road, I decided that every person I sat next to, whether I was on a train, a bus, a plane, a carpool, that wasn't an accident. I was sitting next to that person for a reason. And I cannot tell you how many conversations I started in what are those van pools, like on the way to the airport or whatever. Like everybody's being really quiet, and it's like, so how's the world working for you? And then I'll hear, uh-oh, this is going to get us in trouble. I said, okay, how do you think it's working for your children or your grandchildren? And bingo, that would open up conversations. It really would. So I made a couple mistakes, but mistakes you learn from and you can come back. And there is people are actually bursting. We are wired to connect. Okay. So it's there. It just needs the right opening. And when I taught at Hawaii Preparatory Academy, I've taken some paying jobs just so I can pilot school lessons and see what the kids think. So these are actually, like elite and their parents and their grandparents. And I've had kids towing elderly people across the campus. My mom or dad or my grandparents want to meet the civics teacher that's visiting our campus, and I was like, oh, you're the civics teacher. But I was actually stopped by some of these kids in the middle of I gave them seminars once a week. And now how am I going to explain this to my grandfather? And we talked that through. We talked that through. Grandpa, is the world the same now as it was for you? No. There's ways to start these conversations and just practicing.
Storytelling. I have one more thought I want to throw in that I was thinking. That's when you have the opportunity to reach people who have influence over not the most educated people, but everybody. Like, for example, romance novel writers and comic book authors. There's messages that they can put into their stories, and some of them are doing it, and some of them are doing it well. But I think we need to encourage more of that, because that's going to reach some of the folks that it's hard to reach directly.
And movies. That's hilarious. Do you see how many movies are coming out now about sort of the power of one, which, okay, that used to be the lone wolf. Now it's like we need to work together. But anyway, yeah, subliminal messaging.
Great. Thank you so much. I see, Eli, your hand up. Maybe we can invite you to be part of this next cycle. We're going to do more sharing here. I want to add another sort of prompt in here. One unfortunate reality of living here now is that most of us have a story about environmental catastrophe. Most of us have lived through or been impacted by the destruction that comes from extracting and corporate pillaging. Many of you have heard my story about my entire hometown burning down and learning that Pacific Gas and Electric had killed nearly 100 people there. You have probably read some of our corporate rule stories on the website. There are too many of these examples, right? I'm going to open up the space for folks who would like to share some of their stories. If you'd like to briefly share for a few minutes about your own personal corporate rule story, you're invited to. They can be stories and examples of destruction, but they can also be stories of resistance and hope and action. So I'm going to start out by calling on Alfonso, because I know that he has one. And then if you'd like to share your own, you could put your name in the chat or raise your hand like we did before. All right. So Alfonso, why don't you start? Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here. So yeah, my name is Alfonso. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm from Texas. Although for the last few years I was living in Pennsylvania, but last year around February, early February, I came down to Texas to be with my mom, who was going to be undergoing an emergency brain surgery. That on its own, it's a whole story of how medicine nowadays is a for-profit business, and more often than not, it's inaccessible to a lot of people. But the story that I wanted to share with you all today is about how climate change, coupled with corporate greed, exacerbates everything. So you might have heard of the 2021 Texas winter storm, when this colossal polar vortex covered most of the country, including the entire state of Texas all at once and for a prolonged amount of time. Unlike many of the other states that were faced by this polar vortex, Texas could not get electricity from neighboring states, since Texas opted not to be part of the big electrical grids back when they were being built nearly 100 years ago. And all because Texas didn't want the federal government to have regulatory power over grids, which left Texas on its own with an electrical grid that does not have to follow the same regulations as the rest of the country. Basic sensible things like ensuring reliability in extreme weather conditions and requiring the state government to create winterization standards for their energy sources, as well as coast standards and being able to get electricity from other states in emergency cases, which that would have been good in that circumstance. The lack of regulatory power made all of these things voluntary. And for private companies, this is an invitation to cut corners and save money. Places like Houston and Austin had no electricity for about 6 or 7 days, and many water pipes burst when the temperatures dropped below 2 degrees. There were more than 16 people dead, all because they couldn't get electricity to stay warm. My community was sort of lucky because it's small, and they were able to repair the things that needed to be repaired soon, within a couple of days. But even a few hours within electricity and freezing temperatures is scary, especially when you have your mom that is recovering from a very delicate procedure. It's just a few days before all of this happened. So 1 year later, some of these problems that we experienced with the power grid are still there and have not been addressed. Corporations keep dragging their feet. One of the major concerns is that natural gas supplies have not been winterized enough, and most Texas power plants use natural gas to operate. The natural gas industry is regulated by the Railroad Commission, and it could take up to another year for them to finalize the winterization rule. But of course, there's going to be corporate interests in the middle that are going to be on the way. This should be a warning for the rest of the country, not only because the entire electric grid that serves the entire country have been operating for about 60 to 70 years, even though they were only meant to work for only 50. The big winter storms are only going to keep coming back stronger every year. But the energy companies are trying to make every penny and profits that they can. And before trying to have to face the facts, we need to make an upgrade to the electric grid, and that implies going green and having renewable energy. We also need to stop destroying the environment for profit. And for me, the best solution to that is passing an amendment to end corporates having so much leverage over our politicians and having the ability to object and put guild locks and everything that we want to achieve for the betterment of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alfonso, for sharing. Would anybody else like to share a story? Or you could circle back to questions for Ricky as well if you'd like. Jenny, yeah, please.
Okay, sorry, the setup's a little different. Hi, Ricky. Hi, everybody. It's so great to see so many familiar and wonderful faces here. I'm in Pensacola, Florida now. I met Ricky about 10 years ago, almost 12 now. When she was doing what she was talking about, coming to the Gulf Coast after the oil spill. I was a journalist in Florida when the oil spill happened, and that became my main focus for a year, trying to tell stories of the community. When it came to community health, that's when things get a little dicey because, well, for so many reasons. But that's really when I started realizing, you know, the corporate stranglehold that we have, and that's where my journey began in advocacy, and my focus became working, you know, at the grassroots level, trying to build power, following protests all over from, you know, I really started seeing, okay, so we're all connected, you know, from the School of the Americas protests to, you know, climate action in New York, or a tree sit in California, somebody trying to get a community rights bill passed in their community. All of these things, that it started becoming my life. And it is now, you know, what kind of gives me the energy to move forward. Because, you know, if not, looking at the real stark reality that we're facing, it's either that or curl up in a ball and stay there. So I just wanted to get on and express my deepest gratitude for what everybody on this call is trying to do. And I do believe that the future is brighter because we're in it together. And you know, the power of one, and we are all one. So thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for sharing that story. Okay, I think we've got time for one or two more. Mike, go ahead.
What Jenny said triggered my thoughts about something, about the BP oil spill. Here in Pensacola, Florida, we're in a very conservative area. I think I've unmuted myself, but my screen is still telling me to unmute myself. We're in a very conservative area. There's a tremendous population of military retirees, but following the BP oil spill, and I think we have to give it credit for being part of the influence that led to our ability to get resolutions in support of the amendment from the Pensacola City Council and the Escambia County Board of County Commissioners in short order after the BP oil spill. And that's a little bit of a lesson. Unfortunately, there are going to be these kind of localized and sometimes not so local casualties. And those are the things that can be followed by people having a perception that there's something we have to work together to overcome. You know, the Black Plague is supposed to have been a tremendous factor in freeing up Western culture for there to be a renaissance. We have to look for those opportunities and capture them, even though, God forbid, these things happen. We wish they wouldn't, but you know, when they do happen, it's an opportunity to open up people's thoughts.
Thanks, Mike. Eli.
So I wanted to ask Ricky again this question. I know that first I want to say to Mr. Alvaro, I'm really sorry about your mom. That was that was a very sad story. I hope she's okay now. But I want to ask Ricky this, going back to what I wanted to say earlier. I understand what you're saying about college students are already indoctrinated in their mindset, but that's also not true, because in every college, there's like, okay, if you had 95% of the students are more involved or indoctrinated in whatever their mindset is, there's still 5% that is motivated to do something. And Jenny told me today that all it takes is 5% of people to make a momentous change. And because there are political action movements in each of these colleges, I do believe that that they don't even know about Move to Amend or about all the work that Ricky Ott has done. Then if we were able to connect with even just one of these different, like every single college has so many different political action committees and protest people and people that are actively interested in making an effort in climate change. And just because they don't know about everything that Ricky Ott is involved in, and they're not educated about all of these other things, and they're only focused on climate change when they're not realizing that the root cause of the climate change is the democracy. And so these are the kids that we can talk to, because in all of the other movements in the past, it all started with colleges. And you look at the civil rights movement, and even like right now with the police brutality movement, it was always in universities where people like started getting angry in anti-Vietnam War protests. And I know that, yeah, I know what you're saying. That you got to start with educating high schoolers and elementary schoolers and middle schoolers. That's true. But the problem is that by the time these kids get to college, either they'll have, lost hope, or it'll be like way later from now. But I mean, as much as that's also important, I think that we can do exactly what you're saying and unite people in this way by going through the colleges. If just one of them would just answer us and say, hey, I'm willing to meet somebody for Move to Amend, then we'll send somebody for Move to Amend. And then that person will come and get those kids in that particular, because you know what I realized today was that I can't connect with people when they're on the go doing whatever they're doing. But if I meet people who are actively interested in making impact on climate change, and I meet people who are actively interested in making an impact in our democracy, and these people go to a university, and there are so many, they already have clubs, then those are the people that'll be very interested in hearing what you're saying.
Okay,
And
Eli, I want to
you're the
reframe and
perfect
agree with
person.
you. I want to agree with you. Yeah.
You are the perfect person just from listening to
I want
you.
to disagree with you on that
Around
point.
the world. No, because I mean, like, I know you're humble, but you you can't be everywhere. That's the thing. So you have to
That's
have
it.
people that can relay everything that you've said. Various people, Jenny would go to colleges in Florida, and Alfonso would go to the colleges in Texas. But if we could just send out, there's so many more than just the NAACP. If we send out an email or a letter to every single, in Columbia University alone, there's like 12 different political action committees. I have the list right here. There is
Whoops.
there.
Well, there
So
you go.
I know some of these are going to have to answer you. They're going to see your email. They're going to say, wow, this is like, there's the Columbia University Libertarians, the Columbia Bernard Young Democratic Socialists of America, Columbia Republicans, Columbia Democrats. I know at least one, Columbia for Biden, Columbia Votes, at least one of these groups. They're going to hear what you're saying in your email, in your letter, and we're going to send the right person out there to speak in the right way with the right paperwork and everything. And they're going to be, at least somebody there is going to be motivated and moved. And
Okay, that's got the idea.
Okay,
I'm
so
overspeaking.
So I'm going to agree and disagree with some of your points. So the agreement part is I remembered back to I didn't mean to come down so hard on colleges, okay? Because I do agree that they're one of the key places to like build and churn movements. And if you go all the way back to the Colin Powell memo of 1971, one of the key planks in that platform, which was a total Chamber of Commerce, businesses in America, how are we gonna, how are we gonna deal with this this threat to our free market economy, the threat being the civil rights movement and the environmental movement of the 60s and 70s. That was the Colin Powell memo. It was a response, it was a backlash to how are we going to deal with this? And Colin Powell was an attorney at the time, and he wrote a letter to the US Chamber of Commerce and said, okay, you can just Google this online. Not Colin Powell, it's just the Powell memo of 1971. It's 4 planks. The business community has to organize. And that is a beautiful model for organization. We have to take over the opinions, the public opinion. We do that through the ballot box. And how do we manipulate public opinions? There's a whole set of laws, Supreme Court decisions on that. How do we take back the education process? That was one of it. We need, professors, we need on all these campuses. And the intent was to go into the lower grades, but to start at the universities, to start shifting the opinion in these campuses. And one of the other planks was the Supreme Court is key. We have to pack the Supreme Court with activist-minded judges. And Powell himself became a Supreme Court justice.
Lewis Powell.
Lewis Powell, thank you. I got hung up on Colin. Thank you.
Why are we talking about that though, Ricky?
We're talking about it because it shows that education is should be a key point in a platform. It should be one of the threads that we bring in.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate you both.
Are you muted? One person is
Farrell didn't have to be on staff yet.
Yes,
so
I'm sorry to interrupt
be
like
on
that.
staff, Farrell.
But the point is
Okay, thank you all so much. If you would like to be on, we actually have to move on, but thank you so much. But what you're saying is really related to what we're going to do next. The next prompt is that the idea here is for us to meet again in a meeting and to come together and figure out what this group is doing, right? So like we've said before, this is just a launch. This is just us to get together to see that there's energy here. So
we need to find out what move to amend.
Please don't interrupt me. The next thing here is for us to figure out what we're going to do with that group. So if you have ideas about what you want that agenda to be, what you want to talk about in that group, you can put that in the stack right here in the chat, and we will have that. And we will let you know when the next gathering will be for this group. And if you put in the chat things that you want this group to focus on, if you're going to be a part of it, you will be welcome. And this is not something Move to Amend is going to like put on for you. This is something that we're going to open a space for anyone who has energy for this to come and work. And it is not going to be a new environmental group. This is a gathering of people who understand the intersection between corporate power and environmental destruction and want to do work there. So I will thank you all so much for being a part of this tonight. Really appreciate Ricky and everyone else who communicated respectfully and was here to be a part of this. Thank you all so much. And if you want to, we'll end by everyone putting in the chat one word about, what you see as part of your vision. What is that word that comes to mind when you think of the vision that you have for the world that we're building and cultivating? I appreciate you all being here, and we'll let that lead us out. Thank you again so much. Thank you, Ricky. Appreciate you all so much.
Thank you. And I hope there's going to be like a blog or something on the Move to Amend or on a site that will sort of share what the beginning steps of this were, there were some ideas put forth, just to broadly kind of start framing our next work.
Of course, yeah. There'll be a follow-up email with the recording from tonight and all of the resources that we talked about, and then letting you know how to be part of the next gathering. All right, so we'll follow up with you. Thank you all so much for being here. Good night.